The cold glow of the computer screen, reflected in her thin-rimmed glasses, was the only warmth Dr. Eleanor Ellie Vance allowed into her life. The renowned astrophysicist, whose mind unraveled the mysteries of the cosmos, felt a chilling emptiness gnawing at her soul. The news arrived in a formal email. Like almost everything in her meticulously rationalized existence, the Starlight Observatory, the birthplace of her passion, was on the verge of closing. It wasn't just an old building, it was a reliquary of forgotten dreams, the last link to the idealistic Ellie she had left behind in her tireless pursuit of scientific recognition, feeling a pang of remorse for having distanced herself from the simplicity that once motivated her. Ellie tidied the stack of scientific papers on her desk, a ritual that attempted to contain the emotional chaos the news unleashed. Her relentless quest for scientific breakthroughs, for a new discovery that would elevate her even further, was a shield against vulnerability, against the feeling that something essential had been lost on her journey to success. She rationalized everything, avoided delving into emotions, but the observatory was an open wound, a reminder of her younger self and the pure joy of simply looking at the stars, before ambition and pragmatism took over every aspect of her existence, erasing spontaneity. That place, with its majestic telescopes and the reverent silence that permeated its corridors, was a portal to a lost constellation within herself. For Ellie, the closure represented more than the loss of a research point. It was the end of an era, the definitive burial of a part of her that still dreamed with the innocence of childhood. She felt the weight of all the choices made, the abandoned paths, the stars she had stopped contemplating with her soul, focusing only on the coldness of numbers and complex equations. The charity event in her hometown, organized to try and save the observatory, was a stage for her disconnection. Surrounded by scientific luminaries and philanthropists in formal wear, Ellie felt like a wandering celestial body, unable to anchor herself. She spoke about the importance of science, about the observatory's legacy, her voice polished but devoid of the passion that once moved her, seeming more like a machine reciting facts than a human being with memories and feelings intrinsic to that sacred place. Her eyes, accustomed to scrutinizing the starry abyss, wandered through the crowd, searching for a familiar face, an echo of the past that could fill the deafening silence of her own soul. It was a subconscious search for something that would connect her back to that version of herself who believed in magic and dreams, a version that seemed to have been obliterated by the demands of a brilliant career, but which deep down still longed to be rediscovered. Suddenly, a loud, charismatic laugh echoed through the hall, a sound that, for an instant, made her falter, her eyes fixed on the source. Gabe Foster, the former violin prodigy, the boy who composed melodies as naturally as she identified constellations, was there. Now, a music industry executive, wearing an impeccable suit that couldn't hide the carefree lightness of his smile, but which, to an attentive eye, revealed a weariness that the event's lights couldn't conceal. Gabe walked towards her, his eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and an almost nostalgic recognition. Ellie Vance, the most brilliant astrophysicist in the universe. Who would have thought we'd meet at a charity event for a dusty old observatory? He joked, his tone light, but the dense subtext of a shared history seemed more alive than ever. Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine, the warmth of memory clashing with the formality of her present. The naturalness with which he addressed her, the familiarity in his eyes, brought back memories of afternoons spent at the observatory, under the sunlight, discussing stars and symphonies, a time when the future seemed infinite and dreams, tangible and possible. The image of a young Gabe, violin in hand, and an Ellie with her nose buried in books about the cosmos, seemed so close that she could almost smell the morning dew on the grass. Gabe Foster, the prodigy who traded orchestras for record labels, Didn't expect to see you involved in something so unglamorous, Ellie replied, her voice containing an almost imperceptible sarcasm. The tension between the idealistic past and the pragmatic present was almost palpable, a clash of worlds colliding there under the opulent lights. She knew he had given up music for something safer, more lucrative, just as she had sacrificed the pure joy of exploration for the demands of academia. Both, in a way, had given up parts of themselves for what the world called success. That encounter was a mirror, showing each other what the other had sacrificed and what they themselves had left behind in the relentless pursuit of a kind of glory that didn't fill the emptiness in their hearts. It was an uncomfortable truth, silent but present in every look exchanged between them. It was then that Gabe revealed the final blow. Actually, Ellie, I was hired to manage the fundraising campaign. Looks like fate brought us back together, huh? He said, an ironic smile on his lips, which, to Ellie, seemed to hide a layer of melancholy that she couldn't fully decipher, but which deeply intrigued her. The Chi news hit her like a supernova. Working with Gabe, the man who symbolized the part of her that refused to dream, who traded art for administration, that was the spark of conflict that would break the stability of her reclusive life, the ember that would ignite a fire of emotions she tried to suppress with all her might, but which was beginning to bubble beneath the surface. The observatory, the symbol of her lost passion, would now be the stage for an unexpected reunion and a joint effort that promised to unearth not only funds, but also secrets and feelings dormant for years of choices and separate paths. The air grew denser, charged with a latent energy. In the days that followed, the observatory, once a place of contemplative silence, was filled with the sound of Gabe's phone calls and his frantic energy. He organized events, approached investors, all with an ease that contrasted with Ellie's methodical way. She observed him from afar, glued to her own calculations and reports, feeling like a distant observer of her own life. The main telescope, imposing and dusty, was a silent spectator of their interactions, almost like a third character in the scene, witnessing the tension and strange familiarity that grew between them. For Ellie, the maintenance and revitalization of that instrument was a metaphor for her own soul, needing repairs to shine again with its original light, the one that had guided her since childhood. The first meetings were a clash of personalities. Ellie presented data, graphs, projections. Gabe spoke of emotion, legacy, connection. He tried to infuse life into the project while she clung to logic. "We can't just appeal to emotion, Gabe. We need facts," she said on one occasion, her voice icy, a shield against the very emotional vulnerability that was beginning to manifest. Gabe merely smiled, his penetrating gaze fixed on her. "And poetry, Ellie. Nobody invests in numbers without a story to tell." His light, relaxed humor irritated her, and at the same time intrigued her, like an enigma that she, the scientist, couldn't fully decipher. It was the same lightness he used to mask his melancholy, something that she, in her rationality, could barely identify, but which made her question the depths of her own soul. One afternoon, while discussing the media campaign, Gabe, in a burst of creativity, began to strum imaginary notes in the air, humming a melody that seemed to emerge from a distant past. Ellie watched him, and for an instant saw the child prodigy who played violin in the schoolyard. The image of the old violin stored somewhere came to her mind. He had given up music, but the melody still lived within him, a small thread of a secret about to be revealed. The dynamic between Ellie and Gabe at the observatory, once marked by sharp words and skepticism, began to transform into a surprisingly fluid collaboration. Discussions about the fundraising campaign, previously clashes of ideologies, turned into creative, brainstorming sessions where Ellie's rationality met Gabe's intuition. He provoked her to think outside the box, and she challenged him to anchor his ideas in concrete data, creating an unexpected balance that propelled the project forward. The tension between them was now less about friction and more about a magnetic attraction, a subtle force that pulled them closer, like two celestial bodies in a silent gravitational dance. Each lingering glance, each accidental touch when passing documents, seemed to carry an invisible weight, a promise of something deeper that both tried to ignore, but which became increasingly difficult to deny. One day, while inspecting the old main telescope, a symbol of their childhood dreams and the aspirations they had both abandoned, Gabe found a small, dusty box hidden behind some old books. Inside, there were old photographs of children and a notebook of handwritten sheet music with the unmistakable handwriting of a teenager. Ellie recognized Gabe's handwriting immediately. He hesitated to pick up the notebook, as if the old violin, stored for years and which the sheet music represented, burned in his hands, a relic of a past he had tried to bury. This is old," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible, a thread of disguised melancholy in his tone. The sadness in his eyes, previously skillfully hidden by his charisma and witty humor, revealed a deep discontent and a sense of regret for having given up his musical dreams. It was as if, for an instant, the mask fell, exposing the pain of a loss that had silently accompanied him for years, eroding his soul. Ellie observed him. The coldness of her professional armor began to yield, revealing unexpected empathy. She remembered the constellation drawing she had found, with musical notes. "You used to compose melodies for the stars," she said, her voice soft. An invitation for him to open his heart, an invitation she rarely extended to anyone in her life. Gabe looked at her, surprised by her memory, by the precision of her recall about such an intimate detail of his childhood. His witty humor, his usual escape and shield against vulnerability, gave way to a thoughtful, almost painful silence. He picked up the notebook, flipping through the yellowed pages, and the silenced melody of his violin seemed to resonate in the observatory. Approaching the telescope, Ellie began to talk about the constellations they used to observe together in childhood, the stories they invented for each star cluster. "Do you remember how we used to call that one the constellation of lost dreamers?" she asked, pointing to a diagram on the foggy glass of the telescope. Gabe smiled, a genuine smile that disarmed Ellie, a smile she realized she had never seen on his public face as an executive. "And this one," he retorted with a twinkle in his eyes that harked back to the past, "was the unfinished symphony, because you always said the universe had a soundtrack waiting to be written, and that one day I would compose it." Those moments of shared remembrance filled the space with an intimacy that transcended years of separation, building an invisible bridge between them. The telescope was not just an object. It was the bridge to a past that united them, to dreams that seemed to have been lost in the dust of time, but which still held a faint glow. The observatory campaign gained momentum, and the media began to take an interest in the story of the reunion of the Prodigies from their hometown. Ellie, accustomed to academic sobriety and the privacy of her scientific world, felt the weight of public exposure, the invasion of her personal life that made her uncomfortable and anxious. Gabe, on the other hand, dealt with the press with the ease of someone who lives in the spotlight, but the celebrity life, with its luxuries and emptiness, seemed increasingly oppressive for him. He was tired of the facades, the expectations, the superficiality of a world that no longer brought him satisfaction, only a deep weariness. The pressure of their respective careers began to infiltrate their collaboration, creating new barriers and testing the fragility of their nascent relationship. What was once a subtle attraction now felt threatened by the demands of their public lives, which seemed to pull them in opposite directions. One night, during a fundraising event at the observatory, a reporter, known for her aggressiveness, insinuated that Gabe's involvement was just a marketing stunt for his company, a way to clean up his playboy image. The gossip, like a toxic nebula, threatened to obscure the project's brilliance and the purity of their intentions. Gabe, accustomed to dealing with the press and its intrigues, felt a pang of genuine anger. He had genuinely cared about the observatory, about Ellie's dream, about the chance to do something significant, but public distrust made him question if he could truly escape his predefined image. That incident was a painful reminder of how much he still felt suffocated by others' expectations, trapped in a reputation he himself had built to protect himself, but which now became his prison. He saw the distrust in some faces and felt the weight of judgment. The media incident led to a heated argument between them in the office. Ellie, in her rationality, argued that he should have foreseen it, that his public exposure was an unnecessary risk. "You attract the wrong kind of attention." "Gabe, that's the consequence of living a facade," she snapped, her words harsh and loaded with frustration. Gabe, hurt by her accusation, responded with the same intensity. "And you, Ellie? Do you think your life is so different? You hide behind theories, avoid feeling, avoid living. What's your facade, Dr. Vance?" The romantic tension dissolved into a painful confrontation, the words loaded with unspoken truths, echoing the sacrifices both had made in their youth. The emotional turning point came from an unexpected rival, an old colleague of Gabe's, a talented musician he had managed, and who, in some way, envied Gabe's success as an executive, made an appearance at the observatory during a press visit, taking advantage of the moment to attack him. This colleague, in a moment of Gabe's carelessness, publicly insinuated that Gabe had stolen one of his compositions in the past, an accusation that deeply wounded him. The statement, though false, hit Gabe at his most vulnerable point, his passion for music. He froze, the color draining from his face, reliving the trauma that had made him abandon the violin and composition. That colleague represented the failure, the insecurity that haunted him, the voice that had convinced him he wasn't good enough to follow his dreams. Ellie, seeing the panic in Gabe's eyes, felt a wave of protectiveness. She knew there was something more behind the story, that his reaction was more than just the anger of an accusation. She confronted the rival, defending Gabe with a ferocity he had never seen in her, surprising everyone present. But the damage was done. Gabe shut down, the melancholy in his eyes deepening, as if the well of regret in his soul had been reopened. I gave up music because they told me I wasn't good enough, that I was a fraud, and I believed it," he confessed to Ellie, his voice almost a whisper, revealing the true reason for his escape into the business world. That was the secret that had been gnawing at him, the trauma that had made him abandon the purest part of himself, his genuine passion for music. The confession was painful, but necessary, a first step towards healing and freeing himself from a burden carried for years. The revelation of Gabe's secret, the pain of his self-sabotage, was a blow to Ellie. She realized that in a way, she had done the same. Her relentless pursuit of recognition in science, her aversion to vulnerability, were reflections of an internal pressure, a fear of not being enough, of being seen as less brilliant or less valuable. The climax of the second act was palpable. The knowledge of Gabe's trauma forced Ellie to confront her own wound, the pain of having abandoned the pure joy of looking at the stars instead of just coldly studying them. She realized that she had isolated herself in her own perfection, losing connection with the emotion and beauty of life. They pulled away from each other, each immersed in their own reflections, questioning their life choices and the true cost of their successes. The tension was no longer just romantic, it was existential, the pain of two hearts that had abdicated their dreams and which now, faced with the truth, needed to decide if they would have the courage to pursue them again. The revelation of Gabe's trauma and the subsequent forced distance plunged Ellie into a whirlwind of self-reflection. The observatory, which was once her refuge and passion, now seemed like a mirror, reflecting the choices that had shaped her and the silent renunciations she had made over the years. She found herself questioning every step of her career, every sacrifice, every moment when ambition overshadowed genuine joy. She reviewed the old constellation drawings, Gabe's scribbled sheet music, and the sadness of having abandoned the simple joy of observing the stars, of getting lost in their intrinsic beauty, hit her with overwhelming force. It was a lament for the loss of innocence, for the coldness with which she had treated a passion that, deep down, still moved her. It was time to reconnect with the real Ellie, with the genuine passion that had led her to the cosmos, and not just with academic recognition. She needed to find a purpose that transcended publications in scientific journals and lectures for an elite. Away from the observatory, Gabe sank into his own melancholy. The weight of the revelation about abandoning his musical dream was overwhelming, a wound that seemed to finally open to be healed. He tried to focus on his commitments as a talent manager, but the routine seemed even emptier, devoid of any genuine purpose, like a melody without harmony. The old violin, stored in his luxurious apartment, seemed to mock his cowardice, his decision to prioritize financial security over his passion. He found himself reviewing old recordings, listening to the melodies he had composed in his youth, and the pain of what he had lost was palpable, but this time mixed with a new hope. It was a moment of individual redemption, of confronting the failure of having given up his musical dreams and finding the courage to revive them, not for approval, but for himself. He needed his own melody to heal. Determined to find a new purpose for the observatory and for herself, Ellie began working on an ambitious project, the creation of an inclusive education program that would bring the fascination of the cosmos to underserved communities. She spent hours immersed in research, not for academic recognition, but out of a deep need to share the magic of the stars, to inspire others to dream. Gabe, for his part, found refuge in a small, independent music studio, a bohemian retreat in the city. He began to compose again, hesitantly at first, then with a creative fury that had been dormant for years, a torrent of notes and feelings that finally found an outlet. The violin, which he had set aside for so long, became an extension of his soul once more. The melodies he created were filled with melancholy and hope, a reflection of his own journey of self-discovery, of accepting his imperfections and seeking a new beginning. He began playing in small bars, without the pressure of success, just for the pure joy of making music, of rediscovering his artistic voice and forgiving himself for the lost time, for the life he had postponed in the name of others' expectations. One day, at one of these discreet performances, Ellie, alerted by a mutual friend, showed up. Gabe's music filled the air, a complex and emotional melody that spoke of lost and found dreams, of pain and redemption. Their eyes met, and there were no more masks, only the naked truth of their souls. That was the real Gabe, stripped of his good life facade, exposing his vulnerability and his deepest passion. And there, sitting in the audience, Ellie saw herself, not as the renowned astrophysicist, but as the girl who dreamed under the starry sky, inspired by the symphony of the universe that Gabe was creating with his strings. It was a moment of forgiveness and acceptance, not only of each other, but of their own imperfect paths, of the pains they carried and the choices that had led them there. The affirmation of their individual passions now coexisted and strengthened the love that was emerging. The final scene showed them side by side at the observatory's main telescope, the starlight illuminating their faces. Ellie, with a serene smile, pointed to a distant constellation. "You see, Gabe, that's the lost constellation, but we found it again." Gabe took her hand, his violin resting gently beside him, a symbol of his rekindled passion. "No, Ellie, we didn't find it. We created it together." That moment under the starry sky was the synthesis of their journey, a love that transcended expectations, that had arisen from the courage to revive forgotten dreams and redefine personal success, showing that it was possible to have glory on their own, terms in their own stars, forever intertwined in the vast universe of their feelings.